Are you in a committed same-sex relationship and nervous about what the future holds politically, socially, and legally? Well, stop worrying and start planning. My name is Maxwell, and I'm an estate planning and probate attorney. One problem that same-sex couples face is that legal rights are often up in the air. The right to marriage, for example, has only been federally legalized for 10 years due to a Supreme Court decision called Obergefell. The federal right to same-sex private relations has only been legal since around the turn of the century. I'm making this video to provide a plan of what same-sex couples need to do now so that they are prepared no matter what happens at either the federal, state, or local level. So first of all, I divide estate planning into medical and financial/assets. The first one, medical, is often overlooked. And so my first recommendation is to get a medical directive. Essentially what a medical directive does is it allows you to name who you want to be making medical decisions about your body and treatment in the event that you cannot make those decisions yourself. So for example, let's say you go into a coma or you're in a car accident or you come down with some kind of cognitive issue like dementia. A medical directive is that legal document that says, this person is who I want to make decisions about my body and my treatment. You may be thinking, well, wouldn't that just go to my spouse? And the reason that the medical directives came into existence in large part was because there was a disagreement about that basic assumption. Now, this was years ago, this was a few decades ago at this point, but there was a case down in Florida of a woman named Terry Schiavo. She went into what's called a vegetative state, where essentially there was limited brain activity, but they were able to keep her heart beating. They were able to intubate her, put feeding tubes in so that she could essentially continue to have a pulse, but there were questions about whether she was really alive or not. And so there came a time when her spouse had to make a decision, essentially, do I pull the plug? Do I stop the feeding tubes, things like that are keeping her heart beating? And essentially what had happened is Terry had never executed a medical directive during her lifetime. He ultimately decided that he would let her go. Now, her parents strongly disagreed with it. What they were saying is that this is our baby. I gave birth to her. Should I not have some kind of say in stopping this? Because I don't think this is what is best for her. Let's keep trying. Let's try to keep her alive. And the problem with Terry not having a medical directive is that the presumption of it being, oh, it's the spouse, right? Well, the parents also, they make a good point. Just because you're legally married doesn't necessarily mean that that person is the person who you want to make medical decisions about yourself. I mean, honestly, there are a lot of people who are married and separated, but legally on paper still married, who they wouldn't trust their spouse with their life. And so when it comes to medical decisions, these private decisions, the lack of clarity ultimately created a national issue because this was blown up by politicians. It became a national issue. And you had the governor of Florida down there who was trying to prevent the husband from exercising what he thought was the right decision in this situation. And the parents and the husband litigated this for a long time. Terry's final moments, those months, those years, really should have been a moment where she was with her family and they were holding her hand. But instead, her family members were in a courtroom arguing about who had a right to make these decisions. Same-sex couples have the additional concern of their parents, and you'll sometimes see this in interracial, interfaith marriages. There may be spouses who the parents don't agree with the relationship, think that they shouldn't be together. And so think about it. If there came a time where a decision needed to be made about, do we intubate him? Do we try to keep him his pulse beating as long as possible, no matter how long? If there were to be a disagreement with your in-laws and the parents, would you have a Terry Schiavo situation? And for a lot of same-sex couples, the answer would be yes, because the parents didn't even like the spouse in the first place, unfortunately. Now, it's really important that you talk to an attorney about this because medical directives are very state specific. Talk to an attorney, but get that in place now to resolve that question before it even comes up. Now, the next one I recommend strongly is a durable power of attorney. Now, essentially what this does is it's kind of similar to a medical directive in the sense that you name an agent to make decisions and take actions on your behalf, but it's for your financial assets. So, for example, let's say one of you comes down with dementia, or really you're just not able to take care of yourself. You're not able to pay the bills because of a mental crisis. I mean, there's a million reasons why someone just would need help with different parts of their life. Typically, spouses name each other as the agent, and essentially what that does is it allows that person who's named as the agent to act on behalf of the person. One example of this is, let's say one spouse has to call the Social Security Administration for a claim or benefits on behalf of the other spouse, but let's say hypothetically, the federal government has decided to no longer recognize marriages nationwide. Now, in that case, the durable power of attorney is the legal document that you would use to say, regardless of who I am, yeah, I'm not exercising my authority as the spouse, I am the attorney, in fact, the agent duly appointed through the power of attorney to conduct business on this person's behalf. The fact that you're married really doesn't come into play. Now, the last one is revocable living trust. And this is a bit of a complicated issue that I want to try to break down as simply as possible. So a revocable living trust is essentially an entity that you create and then you place your assets into it, and then you control the assets, but instead of it being owned by you, on paper, it's owned by the trust. The nice thing about a revocable living trust is that you can say in the trust who you want to have the authority over the trust assets in the event that you are incapacitated or if you pass away. You can clearly set out who has the legal right to do what. You can have your successor trustee be whoever you want. The trust will grant that legal authority to that person to step in and to deal with the assets in the trust. One reason I'm recommending a revocable living trust for same-sex couples in particular, primarily those who have assets, so especially if you have a home, if you have stocks, investments, things like that, if you pass away with any assets in your own name, those assets go through what's called probate. Probate is essentially the court process of distributing an inheritance through the court process. Let's say, for example, you own your home and you pass away, then the process of transferring that property to whoever's going to inherit it is the probate process. When the probate estate is opened to deal with these assets, there's a lot of things that don't favor same-sex couples, frankly. Number one, the law provides that if you don't have a will, everything goes to the closest blood relative. For many people, especially LGBT people, they may have been disowned by their parents, and the blood relation, frankly, means nothing. And so to have everything go to just someone who happens to be related by blood may be completely contrary to their wishes. Let's say you did have a plan, though. You have a will, and the will says, give all of my assets to this person who is my spouse. Even though the will clearly says where you want your assets to go, it still has to pass through that probate process. Number one, probate invites disputes. So people are notified. For example, in some cases, relatives are sent notice that the estate is open, which invites them to challenge the will, to try to get it thrown out. The way that probate does that is that there is a formal process that's really not that difficult. You just have to file a claim saying you're challenging the will, or you say, I think I'm entitled to this. I think I'm entitled to that. Yeah, his will says he wanted it to go to this person who's his spouse, but he promised me he was going to give me the house back 5 years ago. Probate is the process where all of that is litigated. It invites disputes. And as a same-sex couple, you want to try to tamp down on disputes as much as possible so that ultimately your loved one gets what you want them to get. Now, with the revocable living trust, the way that it works is that when somebody passes away, assets that are in the trust, they're not exposed to the probate process like those other assets were if you didn't place them into the trust. And it's also not a public process. It's typically a private process where essentially the trustee who's been named, so presumably the spouse or, a trusted friend, can step in, and essentially the trustee just carries out the terms of the trust, says, okay, they wanted the house to go to this person, so then they do the deed, they do the transfer, and it's done. It doesn't get tied up in court. The relatives aren't notified about the process happening because they're frankly not part of the process, unless, you add them into the trust, of course. But it's the terms of the trust that control, not the probate process. Like I said, everything I've discussed really varies on a state-by-state level. And not only that, but as the federal laws change, as the state laws change, it's so important that you do this correctly. And so I advise speaking to an estate planning attorney. If any issue arises, you have that attorney's number. If you DIY it, you really can't guarantee that it's going to be done correctly or that anyone is going to come to bat if something goes wrong. Now, I'm licensed in the state of Maryland. If you're in Maryland, give me a call. I'd be happy to discuss this with you. But yeah, talk to an attorney who's licensed in the state that you live in, because they're going to be the ones who are kept on top of these day-to-day changes, potentially in federal law, especially as it relates to the Supreme Court, as it relates to the federal government, and as it relates to state government changes. My goal is to provide videos that are informative and educational. If you're into that kind of thing, subscribe. But watching this video is not and should not be used as a substitute for taking legal advice from an attorney in any specific situation. If you guys have any questions or thoughts or concerns, leave a comment. I'll be happy to respond. I hope this was informative. Thank you. Like I said, I intend to release videos breaking down complicated legal concepts in a way that is simple and easy to understand. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.